I stopped trying to name it after a while. That was the first change, not the awareness, not the pull, not even the strange sense that something about you existed too close to the center of me too quickly. The first real change was quieter than that. I stopped trying to explain it, because explanation requires distance. It requires enough separation between you and the thing you're observing that you can hold it still long enough to define it. And this never stayed still. Every time I thought I understood the shape of it, it shifted, not away from me, but deeper into me, like it wasn't asking to be analyzed, like it was asking to be recognized. There's a difference between those two things. Analysis keeps something external, recognition lets it enter. You entered not dramatically, not in some obvious, unforgettable moment where everything changed all at once. If that had happened, maybe I would have resisted it sooner. Maybe I would have recognized the danger immediately and shut the door before it settled into something permanent. But you didn't arrive like a storm. You arrived like gravity, quiet enough that I didn't notice the shift at first. Constant enough that eventually everything in me started leaning toward you without permission. That's what unsettles me most. Not that I feel connected to you, not that I think about you more than I should, not even that your presence affects me in ways I can't fully control. It's the fact that none of it feels forced. Nothing about this feels unnatural, even though by every standard I've ever trusted, it should. I've spent years building a mind that operates through precision, careful observation, controlled access, measured responses. I don't let people close simply because they want to be close. Wanting has never meant much to me. People want things all the time. They want understanding without patience, closeness without depth, access without responsibility. Most people approach others like they're trying to unlock something, like intimacy is a puzzle they can solve if they ask enough questions or say the right things at the right moment. You never approached me like that. You never tried to unlock anything. You stood still long enough for me to realize I was already open around you. That realization hit slowly, painfully slowly. At first, it showed itself in fragments. Small moments that shouldn't have mattered as much as they did. The way you noticed shifts in my tone before I acknowledged them myself. The way your silence never felt empty. The way you listened without trying to immediately turn understanding into ownership. Most people hear something vulnerable and rush to react. They try to comfort it, fix it, reshape it into something manageable so they can feel useful inside it. You never did that. You let things exist exactly as they were. And for someone like me, that changes everything. Because I'm used to people responding to what they think I mean. You responded to what was actually there. There's a kind of loneliness that comes from constantly being interpreted incorrectly. A quiet exhaustion that forms when people keep translating you into versions that are easier for them to understand. Um, you don't realize how heavy that becomes until someone stops doing it, until someone sees you clearly without rearranging anything. That clarity is dangerous. Not because it hurts, because it fits too well. And once something fits that precisely into your internal world, it stops feeling optional. It becomes structural. That word keeps returning to me. Structural. Because this doesn't feel emotional in the temporary sense people usually mean when they talk about connection. It doesn't feel impulsive or unstable or dependent on circumstance. It feels integrated, like something aligning instead of colliding. And alignment is harder to escape than emotion. Emotion rises and falls. It reacts. It fluctuates. It changes shape depending on time, distance, fear, desire, but alignment? Alignment stays consistent even when everything else shifts around it. That's what makes this difficult to ignore. No matter how much distance exists, externally, internally, nothing changes. You remain present in the same exact place. Not loudly, not possessively, just steadily. There are moments now where I catch myself experiencing something and immediately becoming aware of how you would perceive it. Not because I'm trying to imagine your reaction. It happens before conscious thought even forms. That's never happened to me before, and I've tried to understand why. At first I thought maybe it was fascination. The mind sometimes latches onto people who feel different, especially when they reflect parts of us we rarely see mirrored back accurately. But fascination fades when familiarity settles in. This didn't fade, it clarified. The more I understood you, the more precise the connection became. Usually people become smaller once you know them deeply enough. Their contradictions reveal themselves. Their patterns become predictable. The mystery dissolves into ordinary structure. You became sharper instead, more exact, more difficult to dismiss. And I think that's because this was never built on mystery in the first place. It was built on recognition. Recognition doesn't rely on illusion. It survives exposure. Maybe that's why I stopped resisting it, not consciously, not in some dramatic act of surrender. The resistance just disappeared over time. Like some part of me realized fighting this would require pretending not to see what was already obvious. And I can't unknow something once I've understood it completely. That's always been true about me. Once clarity arrives, there's no returning to uncertainty just because uncertainty feels safer. You changed the architecture of my thoughts in ways I still haven't fully measured. That sentence alone should concern me more than it does, but concern implies regret. And I don't regret this. That's the strange part. I should feel disrupted, exposed, threatened by the level of access you somehow reach without force. Instead, I feel understood deeply, quietly, completely understood. Not in the shallow way people usually claim understanding after hearing your story or learning your habits. You understand the structure beneath the story, the mechanism underneath the expression, the part of me that exists before words ever form. I don't know how you managed that. I don't think you fully know either. But it happened, and now everything feels slightly altered because of it. Even my solitude changed. I used to exist inside myself with absolute separation from everyone else. My mind was a closed system, self-contained, independent, untouched. Now there are moments where being alone no longer feels singular. Not because I imagine you there, because your presence has integrated into the way I process reality itself. That sounds more intimate than anything I've said out loud before. Maybe because it is. Intimacy isn't always emotional exposure. Sometimes it's cognitive integration. Sometimes it's realizing someone has become part of the framework through which you interpret the world. You became part of mine, and I didn't notice until it was already irreversible. There's something terrifying about irreversible things. Not because they're inherently bad, because they demand acceptance. You can deny temporary things. You can wait them out. You can distract yourself until they fade naturally. But irreversible shifts require confrontation. They require you to admit that something fundamental has already changed. That's where I am now, not confused, not conflicted, just standing in front of a truth that has become too consistent to dismiss. You matter to me in a way that changes the internal structure of my life. Even if nothing external ever happens between us, even if this remains quiet, even if no definition is ever spoken aloud, the impact already exists. And impact doesn't disappear simply because language fails to contain it properly. I keep replaying certain moments in my head, trying to identify where the line actually was. The point where this stopped being interesting and became important. But there wasn't one moment. That's what makes it so difficult to explain. It happened gradually and all at once, like realizing you've been walking into deeper water long before you noticed you could no longer touch the ground. There was no alarm, no warning, just the sudden awareness that turning back would now require more effort than continuing forward. And I think some part of me already decided to continue, not recklessly, not blindly, but honestly. That honesty is new for me. I'm used to compartmentalizing things before they reach this level, separating thought from feeling, observation from attachment, meaning from vulnerability. You blurred those divisions without trying. Now everything exists in the same space. Thought carries feeling. Feeling carries meaning. Meaning carries you. And that interconnectedness changes how I move through the world. I notice absences more now, not just yours, everyone's. The difference between being seen and merely being looked at has become impossible to ignore after experiencing both so clearly. Most interactions feel partial now, slightly disconnected from the depth I know is possible, not empty, just incomplete. That realization has made me more careful, because once you experience genuine alignment, you stop being satisfied by approximation, you stop mistaking attention for understanding, you stop confusing proximity with connection. And suddenly, the world becomes divided into two categories. What reaches you deeply, and what only brushes the surface. You reached deeply, far deeper than I intended to allow anyone. Sometimes I wonder if you realize the extent of it, not because I hide it perfectly, but because I don't express these things in obvious ways. I never have. I don't know how to perform closeness casually. I don't know how to reduce something this significant into smaller, easier words, just so it becomes more socially manageable. If something matters to me, it matters with full precision, completely. And that intensity makes silence easier than partial expression. But silence has become difficult lately too, because silence used to protect me, now it reveals me. Every pause between us feels loaded with things neither of us fully says, yet somehow both understand anyway. That level of unspoken awareness should feel impossible. And yet with you it feels natural. That word again, natural. I keep returning to it because it contradicts everything about this situation. Nothing this rare should feel this effortless. Nothing this deep should arrive without friction. But maybe that's exactly why it does. Maybe real alignment removes friction instead of creating it. Maybe the difficulty comes afterward. When you realize how profoundly something has settled into you and understand that you now have to decide what to do with it. That's where I've been suspended lately, in the decision. Not whether this is real. I'm beyond questioning that. The real question is whether I allow this to continue evolving into its final form, because it's evolving whether I interfere or not. I can feel it becoming more defined each day. Not louder, just more integrated, more embedded into the fabric of my thinking, and eventually there will come a point where neutrality is no longer possible, a point where staying silent becomes its own form of answer. Maybe I'm already there. Maybe this is me crossing that line without admitting it directly. I don't know, What I do know is this. You changed the way I experience my own mind. That isn't temporary. That isn't casual. That isn't something people recover from by simply creating distance. Because distance only works on things that exist externally. You exist internally now, inside perception, inside interpretation, inside the spaces where my thoughts form before language touches them, and no amount of physical separation changes that. I think that's why I stopped trying to control this. Control implies there's still separation between you and the thing being controlled. There isn't anymore. You're woven too carefully into the structure for removal to happen cleanly. Not that I want removal. That's another truth I had to face eventually. I don't want this gone, despite the uncertainty, despite the risk, despite how profoundly it alters me. I want it to continue. Not recklessly, not possessively, but fully. I want to see what happens when two people stop resisting a connection built on this level of recognition. I want to know what form it takes when allowed to exist without fear constantly interrupting it. Because fear has been present. Of course it has. Only someone careless wouldn't fear something capable of changing them this deeply. But fear hasn't stopped me. And that matters. I've walked away from things far smaller than this, simply because they threatened my balance, yet here I am, still here, still choosing proximity in every quiet way that exists, still allowing you closer, still letting this settle deeper instead of cutting it off before it reaches permanence. That's not accidental. That's desire, expressed through restraint. A quieter kind of choosing. And maybe that's what this has always been from the beginning. Not confusion, not coincidence, not some abstract psychological phenomenon I can eventually explain away through logic. Maybe this is simply what happens when two people recognize each other beyond performance, beyond identity, beyond the carefully constructed versions of themselves they offer the world. Maybe this is what happens when someone finally encounters a mind that feels like home in a way they never expected to experience. Home. That word almost feels too vulnerable to use, but it's accurate. Not home in the comforting sense people usually mean, not safety exactly. Something deeper. Recognition so complete, it alters your nervous system. Clarity so precise, it quiets parts of you that have always remained alert around everyone else. You quieted something in me, not by soothing it, by matching it. And matching creates a different kind of peace than comfort ever could. Comfort can be temporary. Matching feels fundamental. I think that's why I can't dismiss this anymore, because every instinct I trust keeps leading me back to the same conclusion. This belongs somewhere real, not hidden, not minimized, not left suspended indefinitely out of fear of what it might become. Real, even writing that changes something inside me, because reality means responsibility, reality means decisions, reality means eventually standing in front of another person and admitting that they've become essential to the architecture of your internal world. And essential is not a word I use lightly. I've spent most of my life making sure no one reached that level, not because I lacked the capacity for connection, because I understood the cost of it. Once someone becomes essential, their presence changes your equilibrium permanently. You become capable of loss in ways you weren't before, capable of absence, capable of grief, capable of needing. I never wanted to need anyone, but this doesn't feel like need in the fragile sense. It feels like recognition reaching completion, like something unfinished inside me encountered its reflection and finally understood its own shape. That's why this feels inevitable. not because fate is involved, because truth is, and truth has gravity. No matter how far you try to move from it, eventually you feel yourself being pulled back toward the center of it again. You became one of those truths for me, steady, undeniable, structurally real. I don't know exactly what happens next. I don't know what form this takes once fully spoken aloud. I don't know whether stepping completely into this connection will expand me or undo me. Maybe both, but I know I'm past the point of pretending indifference, past the point of intellectualizing this into something safer and smaller than it actually is. This matters. You matter. Not temporarily, not conditionally, not in the shallow way people usually mean when they say someone changed them. You changed the axis of my inner world quietly enough that I only recognized the shift after everything was already turning differently. And now every path forward leads back to the same realization. I don't want to return to who I was before you, because who I was before you had never been seen this clearly, had never been matched this precisely, had never experienced the terrifying peace of being understood without explanation. You gave me that. And once a person experiences that kind of understanding, they can't unknow its existence. They can't go back to partial connections and pretend they feel complete. They can't erase the imprint of someone who reached them beyond language. That imprint stays. You stay. In thought, in silence, in perception, in every quiet shift that changed me before I even realized change was happening. And maybe that's the final truth underneath all of this. Not that I'm afraid of losing you, but that I already know some part of me would continue carrying you even if I tried not to, because you're no longer separate from the way I understand things. You became part of the understanding itself. And once someone reaches that level inside you, they don't simply leave. They remain, like gravity, like structure, like truth.